Black waitress fired for speaking Chinese. What happened the next day will shock you. Cynthia Johnson adjusted the strap of her worn canvas backpack and stepped onto the bustling streets of Philadelphia. At 22 years old, she was navigating the chaotic, sometimes unforgiving world of being a full-time college student and part-time waitress. She was attending Temple University, one of the largest urban universities in the country, on a competitive scholarship for her academic excellence and community involvement. Temple wasn't just a school to Cynthia. It was a lifeline, a chance to break free from the cycles of poverty and hardship she'd witnessed growing up in North Philadelphia. It was the place where she could envision a future not just for herself but for her younger siblings who looked up to her. Her scholarship paid her tuition, but the living expenses, rent, food, transportation, fell squarely on her shoulders. That's why she worked evenings at a modest, family-run diner just a few blocks from campus. The work was hard and sometimes thankless, but Cynthia had learned early on that no opportunity was too small when you were fighting to build a better life. It was just past noon on a warm spring day when Mrs. Lee walked into the diner. Cynthia spotted her immediately, an elderly Chinese woman, dressed simply but elegantly, clutching a small handbag close to her side. Mrs. Lee's eyes scanned the room cautiously, as if she were looking for a familiar face or perhaps searching for a place where she might feel at home. Cynthia had been studying Mandarin for 3 years, a passion she discovered during her sophomore year after taking an introductory language class. The language had fascinated her, the tonal intricacies, the graceful characters, and the rich culture behind it all. It was also practical. Philadelphia's Chinatown was one of the largest in the country, and Cynthia often dreamed of working in international relations or diplomacy one day. When Mrs. Lee hesitated near the counter, Cynthia didn't think twice. She smiled warmly and greeted her in Mandarin. Nin ho, nin xiao bie with macronenji zhma. Hello, do you need help? The elderly woman's face brightened instantly, a weight lifting from her shoulders. Xie, she replied softly. Thank you. For the next few minutes, Cynthia guided Mrs. Lee through the menu, helping her navigate the English terms with gentle translations. She showed her to a quiet booth near the window where the sunlight streamed in, creating a calm oasis in the busy diner. To Cynthia, it was just a kind gesture. To Mrs. Lee, it was a rare comfort, a connection to a language and culture that had become distant since moving to America. What Cynthia didn't know was that Mrs. Lee was no ordinary customer. She was the mother of Wei Lee, a billionaire entrepreneur who had recently moved his mother into his penthouse in the city to care for her in her old age. Later that day, Cynthia's manager, Mr. Reynolds, called her into the cramped office behind the kitchen. Her heart pounded with a mixture of nerves and hope. Maybe he wanted to discuss a schedule, or give her a bonus for handling the lunch rush. But the words hit her like a hammer. You're fired. Cynthia blinked, unable to believe what she'd heard. Why? She managed to ask. Speaking Chinese at work, Mr. Reynolds said flatly. Company policy doesn't allow it. Some customers complained. But I was just helping Mrs. Lee, Cynthia said softly. Doesn't matter. I'm not risking any trouble. Clean out your locker by the end of the day. That night, Cynthia sat on the edge of her narrow bed in her tiny apartment, tears streaming down her face. The job had been her financial lifeline. Without it, how would she pay rent next month? How would she buy textbooks for her classes? How would she survive? Her mind raced with questions and fears. The weight of discrimination, the unspoken message behind the firing, crushed her spirit. Speaking her Mandarin, sharing kindness in another language, had turned into a reason to be punished. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, anxious calls to friends and family, and relentless worry. Cynthia's dreams felt as if they were slipping through her fingers like sand. But somewhere beneath the pain, a spark remained, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. For 3 days, Cynthia Johnson didn't leave her apartment. The first day, she didn't even change out of the clothes she had worn to the diner. The soft black polo shirt that smelled faintly of grease and dish soap, and the faded jeans she'd worn nearly every shift for the past 6 months. Her apron, still balled up in her backpack, remained untouched, like a forgotten piece of her former life. Philadelphia carried on just outside her window, car horns, sirens, college students laughing on the sidewalks, the distant hum of trains heading to Center City. But inside her tiny third-floor apartment, Time stood still. Cynthia lay curled on her mattress, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spiraling faster than she could manage. Her mind replayed the moment in Mr. Reynolds' office on an endless loop. You're fired. Speaking Chinese. Policy. Clean out your locker. She kept wondering, was it really just because of that? Or was it something more? She'd always known that being a young black woman in America meant walking a tighter rope. She'd studied microaggressions in class. She'd read about systemic bias. But living it, feeling it, was different. It was personal. It was a slap across the face after doing something she'd been so proud of, using Mandarin to help someone in need. That woman, the sweet elderly lady, she'd smiled so warmly. Cynthia had seen the tears in her eyes when she thanked her. It was a human connection, a moment of kindness. But instead of being rewarded for her compassion, she had been punished. Cynthia checked her bank account on the second day. $48.13. That was it. Not even enough for a full week of groceries, let alone rent or utilities. She stared at the number on her phone screen until her vision blurred. Her scholarship covered tuition and books, but not much else. The job had filled the gap, paid for soap, ramen noodles, her SEPTA train pass, and the occasional second-hand textbook she couldn't find online. She thought about reaching out to her mom, but what could her mother do? Back home in West Philadelphia, her mother worked double shifts as a nursing assistant at a long-term care facility. Her little brother Terrence needed new shoes for school. Her little sister Amira had asthma and needed meds. Cynthia had always been the strong one, the one they leaned on. Now she felt like she was crumbling. Even applying for new jobs felt like walking through molasses. She updated her resume, stared at job listings that all required experience or long hours she couldn't give. Her classes at Temple were demanding, especially the upper-level international relations courses she was taking. Balancing another job would be hard, but not impossible. I don't have a choice, she reminded herself. On the other side of the city, in a penthouse suite that overlooked the Delaware River, Wei Li poured a cup of green tea for his mother. Mrs. Li sat on a plush chaise, her small frame wrapped in a quilted shawl. She had always been a woman of few words, graceful, soft-spoken, and deeply traditional. Since coming to the United States from Hangzhou to live with her son, she had mostly kept to herself. Wei Li provided her with everything she needed: the best doctors, a personal nurse, imported teas, even a small koi pond on the rooftop terrace. But what she missed most was connection. That was why she had ventured out on her own earlier that week. The independence reminded her of the life she once had, and the kindness of the young woman at the diner, the one who spoke to her in Mandarin, asked if she needed help her order, had been the highlight of her entire month. She was very respectful, Mrs. Li said now in Mandarin as she sipped her tea. Wei Li turned toward her. Who was? The young waitress at the diner. The black girl who helped me order. She spoke Mandarin beautifully. Wei Li raised an eyebrow. Mandarin. Mrs. Li nodded, eyes distant with memory. Only a few sentences, but enough to make me feel seen. What was the name of the diner? He asked, his curiosity piqued. I think it was called Gilroy's, on Spring Garden Street. Wei Li's mind began to turn. He typed the name into his phone. The diner's Yelp page popped up with a few photos, and in one of them, barely visible in the background, he saw her, the girl his mother was talking about. He clicked on the photo, zoomed in. A young black woman with big eyes, long braids pulled back into a bun, a bright smile on her face as she poured coffee into a cup. He stared at the image for a moment, then saved it. The next morning, Cynthia finally got up and took a shower. The warm water poured over her, washing away 2 days of anxiety and grime, but it couldn't touch the knot in her chest. She wrapped herself in a towel and checked her phone. Still nothing. No new texts, no job offers, no miracle messages. She had sent her resume to 6 places. 3 didn't respond. 1 told her they were only hiring full-time, and 2 more said she'd need to follow up next month. She knew what that meant. She put on her hoodie and walked to the small corner store, using $7.83 of the last money in her account to buy a loaf of bread, peanut butter, and a box of pasta. On her way back, she passed the diner. She stopped across the street and just stared. Inside, a new waitress was serving the lunch crowd, a girl with long red hair and an anxious smile. Cynthia turned away. Mrs. Li remembers more. Back in the penthouse, Mrs. Lee stared out the window, thinking about that girl again. You know, she said to Wei Li, who was working from his laptop nearby, when your father and I moved to Hangzhou, I didn't know a single soul. And there was one neighbor, a young woman who helped me feel like I belonged. She didn't speak my language, but she made me feel like I mattered. That girl in the diner, she reminded me of her. Wei Li looked up. Would you recognize her again? Mrs. Lee nodded. That night, Cynthia couldn't sleep. She kept running through scenarios in her head. She tried emailing the human resources address on her last pay stub, hoping someone would listen to her story. Maybe someone higher up would recognize how unfair this all was. But deep down, she doubted it. People didn't care about fairness when you were poor, young, and black. She'd seen it too many times. Fairness was a privilege. She pulled her laptop into bed and opened an old file, her Mandarin study notes. She hadn't looked at them in days. Just seeing the characters made her feel heartbroken. She clicked the audio files her professor had recorded for pronunciation practice. En-ho. W-shizuesh. Hello. I'm a student. She repeated it softly to herself. Her voice cracked. The next morning, something shocking. The knock on the door came at 10:17 a.m. Cynthia, still in pajama pants and a temple hoodie, peered through the peephole. A tall man in a black suit stood in the hallway, flanked by a petite middle-aged woman with short hair and a warm smile. She opened the door slowly. Miss Cynthia Johnson, the man asked. Yes. I'm Wei Li. This is my assistant, Mai. We'd like to speak with you. It's about your recent job, and my mother. Cynthia blinked. I don't understand. He handed her a card. It was sleek, embossed with silver letters that simply read, Wei Li, founder and CEO, Zentech Global. Cynthia's heart dropped. You spoke to my mother a few days ago, Wei Li continued gently. She told me everything. What you said, how you made her feel, and what happened after. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Cynthia whispered. You didn't, Wei said, but your former employer did. Cynthia stared at him, unsure what was happening. And then he smiled, not just politely, but sincerely. I'd like to offer you a position, he said. A paid opportunity. One that values your language skills, your kindness, and your intelligence. Her mouth dropped open. What? Wei Li handed her a small white envelope. Take the day to think about it, he said. But my mother insisted we find you. She said, you reminded her that kindness still exists. That matters. And with that, he turned and left. Cynthia stood there, stunned, the envelope trembling in her hand. Inside was a contract, and a check, for $10,000. Cynthia stood in her doorway, staring at the envelope in her hands like it might dissipate. $10,000. That number alone felt like a dream. But the letter inside was even more shocking. Wei Li, a billionaire, was offering her a real job. Not as a waitress, not as someone wiping down tables or serving drinks, but a job that used her brain, her skills. She sat on the edge of her bed, heart racing. Was this real? She took a deep breath and opened the letter again. It was printed on thick paper, the kind rich people probably used all the time. At the top was the logo of Zentech Global, one of the biggest tech companies in the country. It read, Dear Miss Cynthia Johnson, after hearing about the kindness you showed to my mother, and the unfair treatment you received afterward, I would like to invite you to join a special cultural outreach program at Zentech Global. This is a paid opportunity that will allow you to use your language skills, learn from our international team, and contribute to a new global community project focused on diversity and inclusion. Please contact me directly using the number below if you're interested. I look forward to speaking with you. Sincerely, Wei Li, CEO. Cynthia read it 3 times. Then she cried. An hour later, Cynthia called her best friend, Jasmine. Girl, you will not believe what just happened, she said, her voice shaking. You sound like you saw a ghost. Not a ghost, a billionaire. What? Cynthia explained everything. The diner, the old woman, the firing, and now this letter from Wei Li himself. Jasmine was quiet for a second. Then she said, CYN, I know stuff like this only happens in movies, but you helped someone. And she remembered. That's real. But what if it's a scam? What if it's too good to be true? Didn't he come in person? He gave you a check. Yes. Girl, cash that thing. But take it slow. Don't sign anything crazy. And maybe meet him in public first. You've got nothing to lose. Cynthia nodded slowly. Yeah, okay. 2 days later, she agreed to meet Wei and Mrs. Li for tea, at a quiet tea house near Chinatown. This time, Cynthia wore her best jeans, a soft pink sweater, and tied her braids back into a neat ponytail. Her nerves were all over the place, but when she walked in and saw Mrs. Li's warm smile, she relaxed a little. Hello, Cynthia, Mrs. Li said in slow English. Hello, Cynthia said, bowing her head politely. Then, in Mandarin, she added, An ho. Hn goxing jian down in. Hello. It's nice to see you. Mrs. Li's face lit up. You still remember your Mandarin, she said, her voice soft with joy. Of course, Cynthia said. It means a lot to me. Wei smiled from across the table. My mother talks about you every day. You gave her more than help. You gave her dignity. Cynthia's cheeks turned red. I was just doing what I thought was right. That's exactly why I want you on our team. Over the next few days, everything changed. Cynthia went to the Zentech office for the first time, a tall glass building near the river, filled with sleek halls, smart-looking people in suits, and rooms that smelled like fresh coffee and new technology. It was nothing like the diner. Her new job wasn't fully defined yet. Wei told her she'd help plan events, build international student outreach programs, and even assist in translating documents when needed. Most of all, she would represent what inclusion really looks like. They paid her $1,000 upfront, just for her first week of onboarding. Cynthia felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. But not everyone was happy. Some people at Zentech whispered when she walked by. One woman at the front desk asked her twice if she was in the right place. A young man in a meeting once asked, "Is she someone's assistant?" Cynthia smiled through it, but the doubt hurt. Even worse, she got a text from a number she didn't know. That's what you get for playing with rich people. Don't get too comfortable. She didn't reply, but it made her stomach twist. Was someone watching her? Later that week, Cynthia visited Mrs. Li again. She didn't bring gifts, just her time and conversation. They drank jasmine tea and looked out at the koi pond on the rooftop. You are strong, Mrs. Li said in Mandarin. But strength can feel lonely. Cynthia nodded. I feel like I don't belong here. You belong exactly where you are, Mrs. Li said firmly. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. For the first time in days, Cynthia smiled without worry. That same night, Cynthia passed by Gilroy's diner on her way home. She stopped short when she saw a familiar face through the window. It was Mr. Reynolds, her old boss. But he wasn't behind the counter. He was at a table, being yelled at by another man in a suit. The sign on the door said, "Under new management." Cynthia's eyes widened. Was it because of what happened to her? The phone call that changes everything. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Wei. I need to ask you something important, he said. Sure. We're launching a global diversity program. I want you to lead it. Travel, speak, represent what Zentech believes in. It's a huge step up. More responsibility, more visibility, and a real salary. Cynthia's heart skipped a beat. Why me? She whispered. Because the world needs to see you. Cynthia stood at the podium, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Rows of people sat before her in the bright auditorium, their eyes fixed on her. Cameras blinked, lights flashed. Someone in the front row smiled at her encouragingly. Just a month ago, she was wiping down tables, whispering greetings in Mandarin to lonely old women. Now, she was standing at the Zentech Global Summit, about to give her first official speech. Preparing for the big day. It started with a simple idea. Zentech wanted to launch a campaign that highlighted diversity and inclusion, not just as words, but as real stories. Wei Li told his team, "We don't need actors. We need voices." And so they chose Cynthia. Her story had already gone viral in certain online circles. Someone had recorded the moment when Wei visited the diner and handed her the check. It wasn't planned, but the video spread like wildfire. People were moved by the kindness, the injustice, the twist of fate. And now, Zentech wanted Cynthia to tell it herself, to students, interns, employees, and even CEOs. When they asked if she'd speak, she nearly froze. But she said yes. Still, fear haunted her. What if she said the wrong thing? What if people thought she didn't belong on that stage? Your story matters, Mrs. Lee had told her. So Cynthia sat in her small apartment at night, practicing her speech over and over. She wrote it from the heart. No big words. No fancy tricks. Just the truth. On the day of the summit, Cynthia wore a sky blue blouse and black slacks, simple but elegant. Her braids were freshly done, pulled into a half-up style. She looked in the mirror and reminded herself, you earned this. Backstage, she met people from all over, a Kenyan engineer, a Mexican-American coder, a Korean-American designer, and a Vietnamese manager. They all smiled at her, gave her fist bumps, even hugs. I saw your video, one woman said. You reminded me why I started this job. Cynthia's fear slowly melted. The host introduced her. And now, we're proud to welcome someone who reminds us that the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the biggest changes. Please welcome Cynthia Johnson. The room clapped. Cynthia walked to the podium, took a breath, and began. Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm 22 years old and a student at Morgan State University. She transferred there recently with the help of a Zentech scholarship. A few weeks ago, I got fired from a diner for speaking Mandarin. Gasps. People leaned forward. I only said a few words to help an elderly woman feel seen, feel respected. That moment cost me my job, but it changed my life. She paused. That woman was Mrs. Lee. Her son is Mr. Wei Lee, CEO of Zentech. He offered me something I never expected, a chance. Not charity, not pity, a real opportunity to be seen, to wake, to grow. Her voice grew stronger. Some people think language divides us, but I think language connects us. A few words in Mandarin opened a door for me. And now, I want to help open doors for others, Black, brown, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Applause rose. People stood. Cynthia blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered. The speech changed everything. Zentech launched the Voices That Matter program, with Cynthia as one of the lead ambassadors. She traveled to different cities, Atlanta, Toronto, Nairobi, Seoul, and more. She met with students, spoke at schools, even helped translate for elderly immigrants during special tech sessions. She felt alive. Not famous, but free. Everywhere she went, people came up to her. You're that girl who got fired and then became a boss. You helped my daughter believe she could be herself at work. You're the reason I applied to college. Cynthia smiled every time, but stayed grounded. She never forgot the diner, or her nights crying on the floor. She carried that with her, as a reminder. One rainy afternoon, Cynthia walked past the old diner again. It looked different now. Brighter, cleaner. The new owner had posted a sign in the window. We welcome all languages, all cultures, all people. Cynthia smiled and stepped inside. A young girl at the counter recognized her. Wait, are you Cynthia? Cynthia laughed. I used to work here. You changed this place, the girl said. Cynthia nodded. I just spoke a few words. That night, her phone rang again. It was Wei. I have news, he said. We're expanding the program, but I need someone to direct it full-time. You'd have a team, a staff, and a permanent office. It's yours, if you want it. Cynthia's eyes filled with tears. This time, she didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. Three months later, the skyline of Philadelphia glistened as the sun dipped below the buildings. Inside a tall glass office near the Schuylkill River, Cynthia Johnson sat at her desk, her name engraved in gold on a plaque that read, Director, Voices That Matter Initiative. She stared out the window, breathing deeply, a sense of peace settling over her. This wasn't just a job. This was purpose. Every day was something new. Cynthia had built her own team, diverse, brilliant, passionate people from all walks of life. She led workshops in schools, coordinated refugee language integration programs, and designed digital tools that helped immigrants access technology in their native languages. She met with Mays, nonprofit leaders, and startup founders. She even got invited to speak at an event hosted by UNESCO on global inclusion. And though it was all surreal, she never let it pull her away from who she was. She still wore her box braids proudly, still spoke gently, still took time to ask people how their day was. People didn't just see her as the girl who got fired. Now, they saw her as a leader, a changemaker. One evening, she sat alone in a small cafe tucked in a quiet Philly neighborhood. She sipped her tea and pulled out a worn notebook, the same one she had used to write her first speech. She flipped through the pages, smiling at her handwriting, at the crossed out lines, at the fear and hope woven into every word. A new page was blank. She wrote at the top, "What comes next?" She paused, thinking, then slowly wrote, "I used to wonder if people like me could ever be heard. Now I know, sometimes, one voice is all it takes to change everything." She closed the notebook and tucked it into her bag. Cynthia launched a scholarship, the Voices Rising Fund, to support young people from underrepresented communities who spoke multiple languages or came from bilingual homes. The first year, 20 students received full tuition to pursue dreams in linguistics, diplomacy, education, and tech. She didn't stop there. Cynthia partnered with ZenTech to develop a mobile app that provided free language learning and translation support for service workers. The app launched in 9 languages and reached over 100,000 users in its first week. She was building bridges, one word at a time. The final visit. One Sunday afternoon, she visited Mrs. Lee. They sat in the same garden as before, under cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom. "You've changed so much," Mrs. Lee said warmly. "I've grown," Cynthia smiled. "But I'm still me." The older woman reached out and patted her hand. "I knew you were special the moment you said "en-ho" to me." Cynthia laughed. "That moment changed my life." Mrs. Lee nodded. "It changed mine too." They sat in silence, watching the petals fall like soft snow. The ending, or a beginning. That night, as Cynthia walked home through the city lights, her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. "Request for an interview from Time magazine. They want to feature you in their next Leaders of Tomorrow issue." Cynthia stared at the screen, the corners of her lips lifting. Tomorrow. There was that word again. She slid the phone into her pocket and looked up at the sky. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she was ready. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning.